Welcome to the Sensei Kujaku show. This is Anshul Bhide, who's the head of Replit India. Replit is one of the most exciting startups to come out of the US in the last few years. It's created a lot of buzz, not only in the tech community, but in the business community as a whole. It's in fact a unicorn. I think the last valuation was roughly 1.2 billion. Paul Graham, who's one of the co-founders of Y Combinator, actually has spoken about it multiple times on Twitter and other fora. And he's even compared it to the earlier, younger versions of Apple and Microsoft in terms of the potential of the company and how exciting everything that Replit is doing is. What he's doing right now is creating a web app or a website starting from scratch through Replit. And I'm going to ask him to describe Replit and the business a little more in detail later on. But really what I want you to see right now is the relative ease with which he's doing it compared to the traditional process of creating a website through traditional coding that software engineers have done for several years now. Can you explain what exactly you're hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm building a quick web app using a combination of OpenAI's GPT API and Replit IDE, as well as deployment and hosting services, you can see. The idea is that it's super basic. It takes in your preferences and will recommend a beverage based on your choice.
Can you tell me what is the time difference? So you've claimed that you will do this in less than 5 minutes, which is remarkable when you consider historically how long something like this takes.
Yeah.
So can you tell me 5 minutes on Replit would mean how many minutes in the traditional coding world?
That's a really good question. So in a normal process, you'd have to download the ID, but then you'd also have to figure out your environment, your CI/CD pipeline, your packages, your dependencies, then figure out what hosting service you want to use, what hyperscaler, AWS, all that. Right now, as you can see, I'm already done writing the code. I've clicked deploy. I've chosen a reserved VM instance, and now it's in the process of deploying it. Now, hopefully the code I've written works because I'm not a coder. But as we'll talk about this in our conversation, I believe today with the help of Replit and Replit AI and obviously GPT, anybody can have the powers of coding no matter who they are.
Today you are of course you've been doing this for a long time, so it's obviously easier. But the point is that you have been able, through essentially trial and error, figure this out. And today with, relative ease, are just at moment's notice creating web apps for all sorts of things, deploying them all from essentially a web page in the time it takes you to basically brush your teeth, right?
Basically.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And I think, so this is almost done deploying on a reserved VM, but I think that is the power of Replit, being able to go from idea to software super fast, anywhere, anytime. That's the beauty of Replit, essentially. And obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about that more going forward, but yeah.
To your mind, can you describe what Replit is as a company?
Sure. So the way at Replit we like to describe it is that it's the fastest way to go from idea to software, super fast. And I think today, especially with AI, the superpowers of coding are in everyone's hands, be it sort of a technical person, a developer, or somebody like me or you who really don't code on an everyday basis. And I think, so one thing I'm sure a lot of your audience has probably heard about ChatGPT and like being able to sort of AI and generative AI, but what Replit does is it allows you to use that content that you get out of ChatGPT and you're able to deploy it as soon as possible. So let's say you're a young entrepreneur that has an idea, but you're not technical, you don't know how to code. With Replit, you can use Replit AI, as I've shown sort of in this demo, to come up with a basic proof of concept or MVP, and then use that to validate with your customers that, hey, is this something that actually is adding value to my life? Is this something that I will actually buy? Before going out and spending money on a developer team or an engineering team or whatever it is. So I think just to summarize it, the way we think of it at Replit is that now you're not constrained about your technical abilities. It's more about your creativity. And I think this sort of gives a lot of power to those kind of people.
If you think about it, in some ways, Replit is essentially a translator between people who have an idea, which is a creative idea for a website or something else, but don't have the technical ability to create that. And essentially using natural language, you can, with the help of Replit, create something that actually requires technical skills.
Exactly.
So it's almost, it's like, it's you think about it, it's like, if imagine you're in a foreign country, now you're in Germany, you don't speak German, but you can use Google Translate to communicate with someone.
Exactly.
Essentially here what you're doing is communicating with a computer, of course. But I don't know coding, I don't know Python or anything else, but I can effectively use Python through Replit. Is that fair?
Exactly. That's exactly the way to think about it. So if you look at Replit, it's a bunch of components into one. It's the IDE, so the actual place where you code. It's Replit AI, which allows you to code with the help of prompts, but also has stuff like autocomplete. So as you're typing in, it'll automatically complete it, thereby sort of improving productivity. There's deployments, which is the hosting provider. So with the one click, you can either use autoscale or reserved VMs, depending on what sort of app you're building. This as an integrated one-stop solution makes it very powerful for anybody, be it sort of 0 years of coding or 10 years of coding experience, to sort of go there and code up whatever your idea is.
Let's imagine I want to create an app as a business. I know nothing about coding. I've not coded a day in my life. What do you think is the most effective way for someone like that to use Replit? Is it that he should start messing around with it and figure out how to use it? Or is it that even if he has, say, a technical co-founder or someone who's a little more well-versed with these things, it helps him understand the impact of what those technical guys are going to do?
That's a really good question, actually. The first use case is very common, and we see that again and again. To answer your first question, I think the easiest way is, so we have some learning tutorials on our website, something called 100 Days of Code. Paul Graham actually retweeted that fairly recently, but basically in 100 days, you can get some proficiency in Python. We have a Hindi version of that as well, available on our website. So I think one is...
So someone in Hindi can learn how to code Python, correct?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All the content is in Hindi.
Correct.
So that's sort of the easiest way to sort of get proficiency and at least know what somebody else is talking about. I think it's also useful for the second use case that you mentioned. So if you have a technical co-founder, you want to understand what he or she is saying, it becomes, if you know basics of coding, if you become semi-technical, it enhances it by 10x. It's not linear, it's exponential in the beginning. And I think that is what's really important.
So Anshul, we're gonna talk about all of this more, but before we get into any of that, I actually wanted to talk about your own journey.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
So you did your MBA at?
I went to MIT Sloan.
Yeah. So you did and you graduated in
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Was this the first job after your MBA, or did you do something before this?
No. So I worked at my family business. It's an IT services company called CalSoft, focused on product engineering. So I led biz dev over there.
And so how did the Replit opportunity come up?
That's a great question. So one of our classmates at Penn, actually, he was leading business at Replit at the time, and they were expanding to India. So I sort of helped them out with a couple of introductions and all of that. And that sort of, and as they were expanding in India, they were looking at somebody in India as well, given that India is such an important market for any developer tool. And that's sort of how I came on board through that opportunity. India is super important because of the fact that it has the largest developer population today, I think, in the world, or it's poised to become the largest next year. I'm not sure which one. But given that this is where a lot of the next billion developers are going to come online from, that's why for Replit is super important. And it's a second largest user base. It's a fastest growing market as well.
So let's talk about how Replit is affecting the pool of coders essentially in India. So often what we see in India in a lot of industries and a lot of people who come out of quote unquote technical schools and majors is they are technically qualified for something, but in practicality they're not particularly useful employees. They haven't really got the skill required. Now, specific to coding, this is where, as per my understanding, Replit is an incredibly useful tool for them, where through Replit, they can take their sort of elementary, I mean, I don't want to be mean and say elementary, but their whatever understanding they have of coding and really hone those skills through Replit. Can you talk about that aspect of how Replit is helping people who are already, they've studied computer science or something else and know coding broadly, but this is helping them become exponentially better coders?
So I think what Replit allows you to do as a new developer is tinker around or play around. And especially in India, you see a lot of students graduating and a lot of the curriculum is still very, it's very by the book. It's very checkbox type material. But when we were kids, like, I don't know if you played with Lego, but part of it is you can follow instructions and you can according to the manual, but part of the sort of creativity unlocks when you match and mix and match different Lego sets. The same way, and tinker around, the concept of tinkering around. I think Replit makes it super easy for anybody to do that because it supports all languages, all frameworks. We have a bunch of templates that you can go in, you can just fork a template. So let's say you're interested in building a Streamlit app. A Streamlit is a very popular framework for data science and Python apps to build a easy front end. You have a template, you can go and fork it and immediately start coding. And it just makes it a lot easier. You don't have to worry about figuring out what environment to set up or your dependencies and packages or dependencies or packages. The best way I like to think about this is you shouldn't really know how the insides of a car work, how the engine works. Like most of us know how to drive it. Not a lot of us know how the inside works. And Replit allows the same thing. It abstracts away the complexity, the underlying complexity, and makes it easy for basically anyone to start coding without having to worry about, like I said, maybe I'm repeating this again and again, but without having to worry about package management or dependencies or anything of that sort.
Right. That's a crucial aspect, right? So I'll tell you my own case. I've often wondered through my 20s whether I made a big mistake by not studying computer
You and me both.
engineering, right? Because it was like, if you remember the last decade or so, it was like, if you don't know how to code, you're basically a dinosaur, right? It's not about how old you are. It's just it's like not knowing English but trying to work, do business, right? It was as important as knowing how to communicate basic natural language. In a weird way, tools like Replit are, in some sense, making that fear redundant. Because today, people without technical backgrounds can also. I'm not saying I can create Facebook because of this, but you're way closer to that than you would be without it. So, can you talk about what do you see as a larger impact of this? If you think about the business landscape, what happens is suddenly if, for example, X people could think, like X number of people could think about starting apps or technical tech-based companies or businesses, suddenly that could be 10x or 100x or 1000x. And so what is the implication of that in the context of people who otherwise are maybe a little more creative but don't have the technical skills? And are you seeing lots of very unusual businesses potentially come up because of that?
I think you hit the nail on the spot. It's, like I said, I think now creativity becomes more important than technical details. And a lot of the power now sort of shifts to the designers, the product managers, the people with like product ideas. Because, like I said, now you don't need a technical co-founder or you don't need... So you don't need to be technical to start it. That is not a barrier for you to start your business today. You can easily code up a basic web app and get that validation. I think what you'll see is a boom in productivity. Why it's sort of super important is today, if you're learning to code, today, I mean, there's no better time to learn to code than today, especially with the help of AI. Because once you integrate AI into your coding workflow, like I've been doing that for the past 9 months or 10 months since GPT came out. Once you integrate that into your workflow, it just becomes so much easier. Like I remember, so I've taken basic coding classes in college, in high school, in business school, and it's always the first barrier that's the most annoying part. And a lot of people get discouraged. Once you add AI to the mix to overcome the beginning sort of problems or whatever it is, you can create an idea in no time. And I think that is the power. So in a nutshell, it's sort of more power to entrepreneurs, more power to creative people, more power to product people. Obviously, it definitely helps if you have a technical background. There's no two ways about that.
Right.
But I think that disparity is reduced.
Yeah. So tell me,
I moved back to India after business school because I am bullish on India. I think India is the future. One of the problems is sort of people graduating without having the technical chops to sort of start working immediately. Like, you can imagine the amount of lost productivity, given that hundreds of thousands of developers have to go through a 6-month training bootcamp after college at all these big IT service companies before they start work. And if you add up all the man hours, that's incredible lost productivity. If you can enable them to sort of just code better, tinker better, play around better, I think that is the power of Replit.
That's an incredible use case, right? So if you think of your TCS, Infosys, Wipro, that category of company, they have, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of employees, and they spend, I mean, each of them, for example, you read any of the annual reports, they'll constantly talk about, we spend these many million hours training our employees this year, right?
Yeah.
And when I say training, I mean
L&D
training, retraining, exactly. So theoretically, if you could get the same, you could train them to the same skill level in half of 1 quarter or 1/10 the time. This is real dollars and cents saving, right? This is not just some ephemeral sort of hypothetical thing.
Yeah.
So that is, I mean, in some ways, an incredible use case of that, right?
Why Replit in particular, like the reason why we have such strong product market fit in India is that you don't need a super high spec'd out computer if you had a local ID. Because if you have a local ID, like say VS Code or something, you need to have the specs of the hardware to be able to run it, your local machine. Because this is in the cloud, all you need is a strong internet connection, which I think with the help of Geo and 5G, that's there. And you can connect to the internet and start coding from a Chromebook with the same level of resources as somebody in Silicon Valley with a spec'd out laptop has.
There's probably kids today who are in tier 2, 3, 4 cities, towns, villages maybe eventually, and they may have all the intelligence and creativity in the world, and finally they now have the tools, right, to actually make something. So there could be a kid sitting in some village with 5,000 people today, and there's no reason he can't come up with the next big thing, right?
So there's this, so we have a program called Bounties, which is basically a sort of freelance network. You can go and you can post a problem that you want to code up, and somebody from the Replit community will code it up for you. So there's this kid in somewhere in West Bengal who comes from a family of farmers. He's been completing bounties, and I think he's earned some insane amount, like I think more than $5,000 in a single month, which is more than what his entire family earns, coding from his mobile. He doesn't even have a computer. He codes on Replit from his mobile, and he's earning all this money. And it's just like such a strong story of economic empowerment, and what all you need is access to the internet, and this is what you can do.
So this is remarkable. I'm just going to talk about this case, okay? So just to put this into context, there is a kid somewhere in a remote part of West Bengal who has nothing but presumably a very low-end smartphone and internet connection. And the Replit mobile app. So through Replit, in 1 month, he is probably making more than what his dad makes in a year.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, approximately. It's definitely I've spoken to him personally. It's definitely a life-changing amount of money that he's earning.
No doubt. I mean, you think about it today, for example, everyone loves talking about, as far as the India story goes, that, India is going to be a 5,000 per capita economy. This kid is making 5,000 a month. I mean, I know it's not an apples comparison, but what I mean is that I'm saying this is how we get there, right? This is how India develops, right? Exactly. That you have people with essentially no tools.
Yeah.
Suddenly you give them one tool and they can unleash all the creativity and intelligence in the world.
Absolutely, yeah. That's exactly it. So I think another great example of product market fit in India is our mobile app. India is obviously the largest user base for a mobile app, and when we first launched it, there was some criticism saying who the hell codes on mobile. But there are so many kids, and even like not just kids, but also professional developers who code on mobile in India, because it's just like very easy. We're so used to our smartphone, and we're so used to sort of using it for everything in our lives that, hey, why not code and deploy stuff also on it?
That's remarkable. I mean, today, for example, so when talking about bounties, it could be someone like on his way to work, he's spending an hour on a train.
Exactly.
He can literally be earning money instead of watching reels on Instagram. He can be making money as he goes to and from work, right? It's an incredibly powerful tool for an economic tool. I'm saying forget the technical aspects of how remarkable everything that Replit does is. I'm saying if you look at it purely from a sort of dollars and cents point of view, this is literally putting money in the pockets of people and giving them a chance to use whatever skills they have. And not only use, this is people can log on a Replit, learn how to do it, then actually put that to use and make money off it, correct?
That, I mean, you just encapsulated our thought process in a nutshell. Learn on Replit, code on Replit, earn on Replit, and I mean, besides bounties, you also create a web app, monetize it on Replit, host it on Replit. That's the end game.
Right. Yeah. Well, Anshul, I just want to end with one last question. I want to talk about something you mentioned earlier, which is sort of why you joined Replit to begin with in India, and the fact that you're bullish on India. I want to ask you a slightly more general question. This is beyond any particular company. That it always, I wonder why or when it will happen that a Replit or that kind of company, which is like groundbreaking technical stuff. When is a kid in India going to make that, where some app out of India is used globally? So there's going to be people in Silicon Valley doing a podcast talking about, oh, there's this guy in India who started this company and we use it every day and it's changed our lives. Do you even in the next 10 years, do you see that happening?
That's a really good question. I think, so if you look at how tech in India has evolved, sort of 2000 to 2010, that was IT services. You had your Infosys, HCLs, and a lot of them are fantastic in terms of, they are world-class companies. TCS, I think, is a top 10 brand or something like that. But they began with arbitrage in terms of the cost of labor in India versus the US. 2010 to 2020, you had, and this is in the global context, not in India specifically, you had a lot of B2B SaaS companies. So like Zoho is a great example. Freshdesk is another example. I think 2020 to 2030, you're going to see a lot more AI companies come out of India. I do think that this is our chance to sort of build something for the world. Sort of having been enmeshed in the tech community in India, Bangalore, Gurgaon, Pune, everything, there are a lot more entrepreneurs. And what's different this time is we have the product talent. So we have veterans who spent 10, 15 years designing large scale systems. So actually sort of serving millions and millions of users at that level. So they have experience of designing that level of systems. They are now becoming entrepreneurs. They're leaving sort of your Flipkarts and whatever, Snapdeals of the world and starting their own companies. And I think because we have such a large amount of product talent, I do believe this decade is our decade. And I do think there are going to be a lot more AI product companies coming out of India. That's sort of why I'm bullish, and that's sort of the theme I'm looking at. So this, I guess, these 10 years.
Right. Well, Anshul, thank you so much for taking the time. It was really fantastic learning about Replit and everything that Replit is doing. And I mean, for the developer community essentially, and how, I mean, it was fascinating to understand how non-technical people can use tools to effectively have somewhat of the output of technical people, right? That's in a very crude sense what's sort of my takeaway from it. But thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, of course, no problem. And it's a pleasure being here. And thank you for taking the time out to ask people their stories and sort of spreading the knowledge amongst everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.